I came across this statistic recently, guys. And it's one of the most dystopian statistics that I think I've ever seen. Okay? It's so dystopian that I decided to do a whole video about it for you. So check this out. Here's the statistic. I'll throw it up on the screen for you here too. Americans are more worried about running out of money than death. 64% of people worry more about running out of money than dying. Okay? That is a mind-blowing statistic, if you ask me. And it's a statistic that really drives home a lot of things, right? From havens to the changes we're seeing in the world, to American collapse, to the whole 9 yards. So let's talk about it for a sec. Okay, now the first thing that I think anybody should observe here is that something is deeply and sort of profoundly wrong when people are more worried about running out of money than dying, right? I mean, let's talk about our primal fears for a second, right? Abandonment, engulfment, right? This is psychological things. Mortality, our most primal fear. And somehow in America, the tables have been turned, right? We're more worried about running out of money than death itself. Startling, right? So I was discussing this with some friends, with my wife, and they all kind of, it's one of those things that's sort of, not surprising, yet still shocking. And that's sort of how America is, right? It's become this brutal Darwinian place. But if we think about it, right, no society should be structured or oriented like this, that people are more worried about running out of money than dying, right? Our actual sort of primal fears should be the ones that we have, right? Not artificial ones. And I bet that if we ask this question in other societies, the answers would be vastly different. I don't think that people in other societies, Canada, Europe, would say, hey, we're more worried about running out of money than dying. Because generally speaking, in social democracy, right, people tend to be taken care of, or at least there is some sense of stability there, some sense of security. And that's really what's going on here. When we see such what I would call an existential tragedy unfolding before us, right, then something is deeply wrong. And we know in America what it is, right? It's capitalism gone off the rails, predatory capitalism. And in that sense, this statistic is probably the most damning proof I've seen of predatory capitalism having gone completely off the rails, to the point where it's exploiting Americans to the point where, right, even dying is less of a fear than running out of money. Now, that's a huge, huge failure for a system, because when people end up in those states of despair, when people end up with those emotions, right, that sense of existential terror, which is really what this is, that is when we see the vicious cycle of social collapse really kick in. When people are beset by these existential levels of stress, how am I going to live? I can't make it. Nothing seems to work anymore. My life is at risk. I'm not even that afraid of dying. I'm more afraid of running out of money because nothing around me functions anymore. That's existential terror. And what we know this very clearly. We know it from psychology and economics, right? There's a psychological theory called terror management theory, in fact. And what it says is existential terror like this unmoors a society. It puts it in the hands of authoritarians, fascists, extremists, lunatics, crackpots, right? And this is exactly what's happened in America. When I used to warn that capitalism implodes into fascism, this is what I meant, right? And you could see this coming down the pike, right? I began issuing these warnings like a decade ago. I'll tell you that story another time. But the point is, as I issued these warnings, I could see these dynamics begin to unfold of existential terror, just driving people out of their minds and straight into the arms of the bad guys, all right? So that's kind of how social collapse happens. Now, the other thing the statistic really tells us is that American-style capitalism is a failed system, right? So America, and I don't say that politically, right? I don't have any horse in this race, guys. I like music. All right, can you see the synthesizers, right? Sorry, I'm pointing the wrong way. They're over there, right? Can you see the synthesizers? I don't care about politics and finance and economics. Really, I love music, but I also love reality. And reality tells us that America embarked on this experiment. Very Soviet experiment. Soviet experiment was extreme communism. American experiment was extreme capitalism. Everything was going to be capitalist. Healthcare, education, childcare, all of it. That experiment hasn't worked. It hasn't worked in the sense that it's caused a political meltdown into fascism, right? But it also hasn't worked in the sense that we see it producing these incredible levels of despair. I'm more worried about running out of money than dying. Now, on one level, you could say, well, that's capitalism doing what capitalism was supposed to do, and you'd be correct, maybe, right? But that also is a failure as an economy and as a social system, because it's not sustainable, right? A system that can't sustain itself falls apart, and that's exactly what's happening in America. And that brings me to the kind of larger point, right? Which is that when I say that this is a failure, right? Predatory capitalism is a failure. 64% of people more worried about running out of money than dying, right? Well, like, what is a bigger fear than dying, guys? Can you think of one, right? No, apparently in America, it's running out of money, right? So in that sense, the system is these systems are real failures, historic failures, okay? And what that begins to tell us is that people are afraid of this for a reason, right? They don't feel that they're ever going to have enough money. And they don't feel that they're ever going to have enough money because the way that investment works in capitalism is not providing enough for anybody, right? And you can sort of think of the AI bubble, right? I mean, I don't really care about AI. Like I said to you before, I like music. I don't care about AI. Makes no difference to me. But what I can tell you is that if we have a society that's willing to invest whatever percent of GDP in AI, but it can't take care of its own people, well, that society is not a good bet, right? And so that's kind of like the havens thing, right? I set up this little hedge fund. You can subscribe to it if you want. I won't kind of dwell on that. But the point is, when our systems fail, that's when we turn to havens, okay? And so that's kind of some of the larger thinking behind havens, is to really track these larger system failures, these paradigm failures. If we see that predatory capitalism is not able to provide for anybody, really, except billionaires, at this existential level, where people are, right, even more worried about running out of money than dying, then we have to ask ourselves, is that system, is that paradigm, is that society, is that economy a good investment? And this is sort of why the world is running away from investing in America now, right? Because increasingly it doesn't appear to be a good investment. Even if you, right, I don't know, make a little bit of chump change on your AI stocks or your tech stocks or whatever, in the long run, it's at risk because these systems are unstable. They implode on themselves into fascism, into authoritarianism, what have you, right? So I always want you guys to connect these kinds of dots. And in that sense, what I'm trying to do with Havens, it's a bit of an experiment, and thank you to everyone who's joined me so far, is to see, right? Can we have kind of a paradigm for investment that is more than just predatory capitalism, that doesn't mire us back in the same mess? And I'm pleased to say Haven's doing very well, right? And so that thesis is working out. And you can think of the larger Havens thesis in a lot of ways, right? In an unstable world, we're going towards Havens. One way I think about it is that Havens is sort of a post-capitalist hedge fund. We're not invested in these predatory systems, right? That are causing these insane, horrible, toxic, evil dynamics, right? More worried about running out of money than dying. No, I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a good thing to invest in because it creates its own ruin. All right? And I think everybody should be thinking about that. I think when your finance guys tell you that, money and morality don't coexist, I think they're wrong. I think Havens is proof that they're wrong. I think America is proof that they're wrong, right? And like I said, the world is beginning to run away from this madness, not just politically, right, but economically, financially. So these changes are real, and you have to understand now. I think it's very important. I've been saying this for 10 years, and I don't know if people listened or not, but now I think it's very important that you pay attention to these paradigm failures and these system failures, and you see them for the reality that they present themselves with. You understand the brutal, terrible, tragic meaning of statistics like these. Imagine people living in that much despair, right? And you understand what they portend and what they mean. And then you have to decide. You have to take care of yourself and your wealth and your family and your loved ones. And you have to decide to what extent you participate in those systems, right? And so that's kind of why I created Havens a little bit too. And, like I said, I'll talk about that more in other videos. But for now, I wanted to share this statistic with you because it's so mind-blowing to me, It's so sad. It really breaks my heart. It really does, guys. I don't think anybody should ever feel that way, huh? Okay? I mean, I feel strongly about this stuff. Maybe I was wrong when I said I don't care. Maybe I do care about more than music, huh? Anyways, thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, fire away. I'll try and answer them. See you next time, okay?